Welcome to the Alysrazor 10-man heroic guide within the Firelands raid series. This guide will provide a detailed breakdown for raid leaders and curious viewers, as well as a summarized strategy with role descriptions if you're only interested in the TLDR, both of which are going to be accessible through the timestamps in the description. The Alysrazor encounter has 4 distinct phases and will cycle through these until the boss is dead. Each phase transition is based off a timer, and if executed properly, you can kill the boss before the first cycle is completed. The first phase is by far the longest, and this is where you will spend most of your time during the fight. This phase will have 2 separate teams, the flying team and the ground team. The ground team will manage adds, while the flying team will focus on the movement mechanics while damaging the boss. The flying team will start the fight by picking up molten feathers from the ground. Picking up a feather will allow you to cast while moving and increase your movement speed. When you picked up the maximum of 3, you will gain a buff called Wings of Flame, granting you the ability to fly. While flying, you will have 2 mechanics that needs to be handled. The first mechanic is called Blazing Power. Alysrazor will spawn fire rings, which you should fly through to extend your flying duration, and it gives you a stacking buff, providing haste and power generation. Once you reach 25 stacks, you gain Alysrazor, increasing your crit chance by 75%. While you're flying through the fire rings, you should dodge incendiary clouds, as these will deal high damage if you fly through them. You will continue this pattern until the boss casts Firestorm, which will be explained momentarily. While this is happening, the ground team will have to deal with a couple of adds. The first add is called Plump Lava Worm. They will spawn 3 times in sets of 4 during phase 1. The lava worms spawn in a rectangular pattern and channel a flame breath in a frontal cone while rotating. This ability should be dodged, and they will be dealt with through the second add type. The second adds are called Voracious Hatchlings and are intended to be handled by the tanks. The hatchlings will spawn 3 times in sets of 2 during phase 1. During the phase, 2 eggs will be dropped on the north and south side of the arena. After approximately 10 to 15 seconds, the hatchlings will erupt from the eggs and put a debuff on the closest target. The debuff is called Imprint and will force the hatchling to fixate on the target until dead. While imprinted, the tank will deal massive damage increase towards the hatchling. During the fixation, the hatchling will swap between 2 states, either being satiated or hungry. When satiated, the hatchlings are simply a tank and spank ad. But when the hatchlings are hungry, they have a 20% chance to throw a tantrum. When the hatchlings throw a tantrum, they gain 50% damage and haste increase until they get satiated. The only way to get the hatchling into the satiated state is to pull the hatchling into a lava worm, which will consume the lava worm and satiate the hatchling. You should aim to eat the worm once the hatchling gets hungry and not wait for it to throw a tantrum. The last mechanic of the hatchling is called Gushing Wound. This ability will strike all targets in a frontal cone, which causes heavy bleed damage for 1 minute. The debuff will automatically be removed from the tanks when they drop below 50% HP, so healers should allow the tanks to drop and be ready with quick heals once the debuff is gone. The third add type is called Blazing Talon Initiate. Periodically, these adds will fly into the arena and throw out brush fires and pyroblasts. The brush fires shoot out a slowly traveling and untargeted projectile which traverses the arena. Any player on the ground should dodge these. Every so often, the initiates will cast Pyroblast, which is a targeted and interruptible spell causing moderate fire damage to any targets hit, and it leaves a dispellable debuff on the target. These should always be interrupted by the melee DPS on the ground team. For each successful cast of Pyroblast, the initiates gain a buff called Fired Up. This buff will increase their damage dealt and reduce their cast time on their subsequent casts. The last add type is called Herald of the Burning End. They spawn momentarily in the center of the arena and will summon a molten meteor. Once cast, the Herald will one-shot anyone standing in the middle of the arena in close proximity. When the meteor lands, it will travel towards a random direction, pulsing heavy AoE damage to any target in melee range. Ranged DPS should quickly kill this meteor, and it will leave a static boulder which can be used to line of sight the following mechanics. The last mechanic is called Firestorm and will be cast between each set of the adds that spawn. Once cast, it channels a heavy damage ability to the entire raid for 8 seconds. You can use the boulders created from the depleted meteors to avoid the damage entirely. It should be noted that the flying team also needs to fly down to avoid this damage. Before we go into Phase 2, it should be noted that the entirety of Phase 1 will consist of dodging stuff on the ground and managing the adds effectively. If done correctly, next to no damage should be taken on the targets apart from the tanks. Phase 2 causes fire tornadoes to spawn around the arena for a short period of time. During this phase, you should dodge the fire tornadoes that move around. The easiest way to deal with this mechanic is to recognize that the tornadoes move in a circular pattern in different layers of depth around the center of the arena. You should simply follow a tornado on your layer of depth until a tornado crosses your position on a different layer of depth, moving in the opposite direction. Repeat this until Phase 3 is prompted. Phase 3 will cause Alysrazor to crash into the center of the arena, causing her to take 50% increased damage. 2 adds called Blazing Talon Claw Shapers will spawn on the west and east side of the arena respectively. These adds will channel a spell called Ignition on Alysrazor. Each tick of this channel will shorten the duration of Phase 3, which is not good for you, so you should interrupt and stun the adds while burning down Alysrazor with Bloodlust. Once Alysrazor reaches 50 energy, she will enter Phase 4, despawning the adds. During this period, Alysrazor deals moderate raid damage, pulsing to the entire group. Also, Alysrazor will attack the tanks with Blazing Claw, dealing heavy damage in a frontal cone while also increasing the damage taken by the targets with a stacking debuff. You should place the raid in a triangular pattern with the tanks on opposite corners and the rest of the raid stacked on the final corner. Tanks should roll big defensives and aim to swap when Alysrazor reaches 75 energy. Once Alysrazor reaches 100 energy, she will deal heavy damage to the entire raid and prompt a repeat of Phase 1. Repeat the previous mechanics until the boss is dead. This marks the end of the breakdown of this guide. Next, I will provide you a short TLDR, giving you a formula to get this encounter done. Split your group into flying and ground teams. Preferably, classes which benefit from high haste and crit buffs without getting capped are good options, such as mages, boomkins, and affliction warlocks. You should allocate 2 to 3 DPS to the flying team. Start the fight behind this rock on the north side of the arena to avoid the root during the roleplay. Run over to this crevasse on the northwest side of the arena to avoid the knockback during Firestorm when the boss is pulled. Once the Firestorm is cast, pop a raid CD such as Barrier and stay on the edge of the arena while damaging the boss. 2 DPS in the flying team will take 3 feathers each and start chasing Alysrazor. The remaining 2 feathers can be distributed among your DPS or healers. Healers will play on one side each in Phase 1, either west or east, so that they can minimize their movement. DPS will also be split between east and west, with at least one good interrupter on either side. Tanks will be split between north and south to handle 1 hatchling each. Tanks will preemptively move towards a worm while DPSing the hatchling and eat a worm before the tantrum occurs. Melee DPS will tunnel on the initiates spawning, and range DPS will swap and prioritize killing the meteors when they spawn. Healers, you should keep the raid healthy and allow tanks to drop below 50% to remove gushing wound. Before each firestorm, run or fly to a meteor and line of sight the firestorm channel. You should repeat this process 3 times. Going into Phase 2, you will run between different depths to avoid the fire tornadoes while doing some DPS to Alysrazor. Once Phase 3 is initiated, pop Bloodlust and all offensive cooldowns and nuke the boss. Always prioritize interrupting adds over DPSing the boss. Prior to Phase 4 being initiated, position yourself in a triangular pattern with both tanks standing isolated. Use healing cooldowns to get through Phase 4 and pop a raid cooldown once Alysrazor reaches between 95 and 100 energy. Tanks should roll defensives and swap when Alysrazor is around 75 energy. If the boss is not dead by now, repeat the mechanics of Phase 1 until you are finished. For more details on this encounter, please watch the full breakdown available with the timestamps in the description. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed the guide, and if you did, please make sure to leave a like and drop a comment and subscription on this channel.